Hi everyone, how are you doing? And welcome back to Checkmate the Matrix. So today we have, it's very different. It's a different show we're going to put on for you. And I'm not going to try and give any kind of like story to it because I'm going to let Ian do that for himself because it is quite shocking really and everything that he's been through, very traumatic experience. So, I'm not going to give any kind of like weight to it. I'll allow him to give his whole personal story. And again, hopefully you'll be able to get it across and get other people to have a look at some of his stuff that he's going to mention going through, because it is quite a serious story then. So we'll just crack on with it and we'll get into it and let him say his thing. So Ian, welcome. And
thank
you for coming along.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, no worries. So, I mean, because of like the serious nature of it, I'm not going to say, oh, how are you doing and give us this and everything, it's quite a long, complicated story. So if we go back for yourself, sort of like where it all started, just because people will not be able to comprehend anything unless, they hear from the beginning and see what's going on. So if you could do that, and then I'll let you run with it. If I get confused myself or anything, is it okay if I shout you back to cover anything?
Sure, absolutely. And so firstly, which I must mention, is I am not doing this to cause any distress to the families of the deceased. It's very difficult for me not to bring issues up because, of course, my case is about a very grave miscarriage of justice. And so I want to apologise to them if I do offend. It's not by intent, but you cannot address a miscarriage of justice without speaking about the injustice. And so, and at the end goal, there's nothing more than my wife and I want is to have those two men rest in peace. And at this moment in time, I don't believe they're doing so because this has been a grave miscarriage of justice.
Okay, yeah, no, that's well said. Yeah. I mean, obviously, it is going to be very tough on the families, no matter what happens anyway. So, yeah, but that's good. Well said. Yeah, come on then. So if we go back to the like exactly where it all started, and how comes you put yourself in this position? What were you doing?
Okay, so I manufactured a pig feed, if you like, a porridge called Confectionery Blend. My business grew over the years, and I made this porridge sourcing green products, if you like, from factories, from their discarded products that they had problems with, that they couldn't put into human food chain, or it was oversight, any type of problem. You look, there's one particular factory, and I'm not going to mention factories, that would turn out over 100 tons a week of cream cakes, and you can imagine this was lovely food for pigs. And I held contracts with food companies up and down the country, all blue chip companies, taking away their energy products. This is the sort of product I always sought after, and predominantly a lot of dairy, because this porridge that I sold, everything had to be specific, as in a label on the back of anything you buy from the supermarket. So I had to meet criteria with protein, carbohydrates, fats, fibers, and so forth. And so what we have in this country, we have nutritionists that go to farms, and it's mainly the biggest farms in this country, the biggest pig farms, and they formulate a diet for those pigs to eat based around wheat and barley. And so they look at the properties and the values of wheat and barley, and they look at my product, which was 40% dry matter, and its contents, and based it against pricing against wheat and barley. But here's the thing, with my product, I was selling it at that price against wheat and barley, but there was hidden values in there because, as I've just mentioned, I put a lot of dairy into my feed, and that was added value for the nutritionist, because with dairy, you've got the proteins and all the amino acids, which I wasn't charging for actually, but the nutritionist knew it was there, and therefore their role in formulating a diet and earning their money was selling the farmer a balancer, a vitamins and mineral to make that diet work. And I was able to save them money by having the added values from my product, if that makes sense, with the dairy, which I wasn't charging for. And so that's what I did, and that was what I was very successful at. And I tankered in articulated tankers up and down the country, as far as Landend and as far up as Aberdeen, and in your area, Peter, a lot in North Yorkshire, the biggest pig farms in this country. And just to get to it very quickly so people understand, I made the product like huge blenders. If you're making a blend in the morning to drink, this is how I did it. So I had the huge blenders, and then it went through a process. So when you drink your drink, you can still have lumps. But with my product, it went through like minsters with 10mm holes, and then it was pumped into an holding tank, and then pumped onto my lorry tankers and taken away to UK pig farmers all around the country. And the pumping system on my tankers actually could handle particle sizes of 30mm. So please understand when I say it went through the processing sieves of 10mm, then it goes into my tankers where the pumps go down a 6-inch pipe work. They're loaded through 3-inch, but actually the outlet of my tankers was 6-inch. And why do we do this? It puts pressure to the pump, back pressure, to tip more quickly. And therefore, my pumps that could handle particle sizes of 30mm could never block. And so this is what I'm going to come to. On the 22nd of December 2016, a lorry driver came back to my company premises at approximately 3 o'clock with 6 tons, he claimed, left on his tanker. Now, I had a transport manager called Stuart Brad, very good, highly experienced transport manager with 40 years experience behind him, working for a company very similar to mine called Wayfeeds that actually had 72 men, 42 tankers. I was any one time 5 tankers, maybe 6, maybe 4, depending how busy I was. And so he claimed, this driver claimed, that it had set like concrete, and he was falling out with Stuart Brown in the office, and my son was there, a fellow co-director, as along was my company accountant and my secretary, sales girl, who was very good at her work, called Alexander Fortune. My wife had just arrived that day. Now, she was neither a director, company secretary, nothing. And on that day, she travelled over 80 miles, taking flowers to graves of my friends that passed. She'd rent up to Bevercoats to take flowers to my best friend, who was like a brother to me, to a picnic bench we had placed there. Then she went to Mansfield Crematorium to take flowers to 2 other very close friends of mine. And the bench, actually, his name was Andrew Harwood, and the 2 guys at Mansfield Crematorium, Kev Brewman and Jimmy McBride. She then went on to Underwood Church to take flowers to her parents and my grandparents, and from there to Greasley Church to take flowers to my nephew, who sadly died 18 in a car accident. And she only went into work this day, Peter, at approximately 3 o'clock, at the same time as the driver arrived, because it was Christmas jumper day and to take some lunch for my son. So she wanted to join in with my staff for Christmas jumper day. And I want to make this point very clear. She was not a director. I've had a lot of people on social media say, well, she's a director or she was in charge of health and safety. She was none of those. And so this argument was taking place with the driver. And my wife had had enough of it. And so she said, Richard, just take the lorry down to the mixing shed, back it in, open the free flow valve. Now, this is the pipe that we fill the tanker with, the 3-inch pipe, not the 6-inch one goes to the pump. Open the valve, and if it's set like concrete, nothing will come out. So put the jet washer up there just to ensure, and then climb up the ladder on top of it. And she said this, and people should remember this because this was used against her in court. She said only this on body cam, and wash in it, nothing else. Meaning with a jet wash from the top, if it's like concrete, you put water on it, you'd see it's hitting something like concrete. But if it's porridge, it would have just washed it through, let it all come out. And that's all she said. Now, I want to this point just to say what happened here. So, to the driver himself, in his own words, in his first police statement, claimed that he backed the tanker into the mixing shed. And as he got out of the cab, he claimed that one of the boys that died was already sat on top of the tanker with his legs dangling in the tanker. Now, my wife said, go to the free flow valve. I've just said. He did none of this. He passed this lad a pressure washer hose, in his own words, let him drop into the tanker with 6 tons of product. Something that you never do anyway, and it wasn't part of my company procedures or practices. And then in his own words, he said he banged on the tank to see how he was. And then he said he went around the tanker, climbed the ladder, and he was hanging on the lid. And he claims he dropped into the tank and he was dead there and then under that middle lid. He claims that he came out of the mixing shed running to get help from another fellow driver. And en route out of the mixing shed, as he's running with this emergency, waving his arms, and it had to be loud because he claims this. He said the other man who sadly died was on a fork truck, a Manitou, a big fork truck, driving down the drive, and he shouts to him, "What's up, mate?" So you'd expect him to be on a very loud piece of machinery. This scene captured by CCTV had to be really like an emergency. And then he says that this man jumped off the Manitou, and while he's fetching Nigel Curtis, and I will name the people who I've seen the culprits, to go back with him, the other second man had jumped off this Manitou, and they're only feet apart, by the way, and he's run into the mixing shed, gone up the ladder, and by the time he's gone back with Nigel Curtis, he's in the tanker too and dead. Now, none of this makes sense. And so for over 5 years, and on that night, actually, everyone made police statements, and the person who'd worked for me for 30 years down there, who run the job, along with his son who was the yard manager, Dave Maruniak, the main person, said in his police statement that he and Lievers in toolbox talks forbids people entering tankers. When he was sacked, or actually he left because I sacked everyone else for sabotage, in 2018, the police invited him back to change his statement, and he said the policeman took it down wrong. Ian Lievers does allow people into tankers. And indeed, Richard Draycott, the person that's caused all this, in his police statement that night, said he had never seen anyone in a tanker before. Now, in 2017, spring of 2017, he started to do this again, started coming back with loads, trying to cause the problem. And it was mainly on a Friday. So what I did was I let him go home, and he'd come back with 3 tons, 6 tons, up to 12 tons. And I simply sent the tanker down the drive and loaded the next load on top of that he claims wouldn't come off. I then got in on a Saturday, a part-time driver called Sam Pepper, and he would deliver that load. And I think one of them actually went to Sheddon's up near York. And he'd used these weighbridges where he delivered the load to, and he tipped every bit of it. So I was gathering evidence with weighbridge tickets to send on to solicitors to use against him in court. But they never did none of this, and this is where I start to lose the thread of it because it's long and protracted. And so that's the basics of it. And the police invited several witnesses back in years to come to start changing their statements. And in fact, the girl that did the health and safety, Dave Maruniak's daughter, Nikki Johnson Maruniak, made 6 police statements. And I don't believe it was till the last police statement that she named my wife. And so there you go. From that night, that's all my wife said. And this has resulted in my wife being given life by the judge in the court. And their co-defendant, Stuart Brown, was acquitted of gross misconduct manslaughter. Now, here's something else what everyone will understand. Richard Draycott was a professional person. It's law that he was in charge of his vehicle whilst ever the tachograph, the digicard these days, was in that cab. Now, here's something that shocked me. When I went to see him a few nights after the deaths, he told me, "Do you want to take the digicard with you home?" Because the policeman walked me back down the yard later that night to get my keys and my digicard. I said, "But haven't they taken this, Richard?" He said, "No." But he did keep saying to me, from the bottom of his heart, it wasn't my fault. Why do I say this? Because he was the first prosecution witness to give evidence. The barristers, on arrival to my site, as you come down the long drive, you go onto the weighbridge. Now, when he got out of his cab, and he confirmed this in court before he was shown these other scenes, and as he gets out of his cab, he pulls his overalls on, and he confirmed to the barristers this is what he does. And they asked him, did he put any other clothing on that day? Did he wear any fluorescent clothing? He said no. Overalls only that day. So he confirmed a very important point here. Then they took him on to another clip, which I've not shared with the public, where there's him stood around a fork truck near Nigel Curtis's tanker with Dave Maruniak, Mike Maruniak, and Nigel Curtis. And he had no objections identifying all of them. But the judge intervened at this point. He said, in independent observation, 4 people stood around a fork truck doing nothing. I thought, why are you saying this? What is the purpose of you intervening here? And so then we come to the critical part, which I have captured on CCTV footage. I have shared, and it's on the top of my TikTok post, pinned, where the person coming from the mixing shed, it isn't Richard Draycott. He hasn't got blue overalls on, and it's who we've identified, and I've labelled them, and it's Dave Maruniak coming to fetch Nigel Curtis. Now, Richard, first witness in the trial, pointed to the TV screen when he was shown this clip, and he said twice that it wasn't him. And the judge told the barristers, he said it's not him, and let him go. The person, and this is the first day of the trial, who was coming to collect Nigel Curtis, he looked at the TV screen and he was sweating profusely, and he grabbed hold of the dock and he said, I'm telling you, it was Richard Draycott. Well, it wasn't. It's Dave Maruniak. And so 2 people have lied. Now, I thought on that day, with actually Richard Draycott, I thought the trial should have stopped there and then. Because what's the point of having Crown Court trials if it's not the right people being identified on CCTV? Something that we depend on more and more, and it grows weekly for police work to use CCTV to solve crime. Now, here's the damning thing about the police. The police took my hard drive on the 4th of January 2017, and they didn't return it at all. And in fact, just 2 months before the trial, they sent a 2-hour copy to solicitors, our defence solicitors. And my solicitor then told me, and I've got this on email, that he sent it away to the expert, he said on the email, but the expert made the footage more obscure. Now, it goes deep here, and I'm starting to lose my thread, so I'm going to go ahead of myself. And so all this went wrong in court, and you can imagine now the jury couldn't really identify people because he said the expert made it more obscure. I discovered this year, 2024, that he didn't send it to an expert at all, Sci4 Forensics, who I've sent the hard drive to now. He sent it to a backstreet corner shop in Stockport called Cavalier Studios. I contacted this husband and wife, small business, and they put VHS tapes onto disc and said they don't do this type of work. So I claim the defence wanted the CCTV footage to be more obscure, to not have witnesses identify themselves. And so let's go on. That was day 1. Day 2, Dave Maruniak, who it is, who's leaving the mixing shed, coming for Nigel Curtis, he looked at the TV screen and he said that it wasn't him. He said it couldn't be him. He said, I was unloading a lorry around the back where there's no CCTV. And his son followed him, the 4th witness, and he said exactly the same thing. Now, the morning of day 3 of the trial, by agreed facts, the police agreed that there was no such lorry on site. Now, here's the shocking, damning evidence. The defence never told the jury that both those men had lied under oath. It wasn't passed on to the jury. So the jury were none the wiser now. Now they've had 4 witnesses that's looking at these screens, and they're believing these Maruniaks that it wasn't him. And Nigel Curtis said it was Richard Draycott, and it was only Richard Draycott that said it wasn't him. And the jury weren't told that all their men had lied. Now, here's something else on day 3, and I cannot share this CCTV clip. This is in between the one where, if you look at it, there's no urgency at all. And I'm going to come on to the laddie next. But here's something else. On day 3, Jack Maruniak, the grandson who was down there in the mixing shed, is clearly seen within these two clips on this timeline, exiting the mixing shed, walking away, as I say, callously, coldly, up the yard, past the can crushing shed where workers are in there working, who he should have gone to ask them to come down to assist him. And he went past. And until this year, 2024, bearing in mind this trial took place in April 2022, I had the statements taken by my solicitor because I trusted them. And it was only last year in 2023, I said, where's the statements that James Shrimpton took from the witnesses? And finally, my wife's solicitor, Nathan Buckley, said, here's the notes James took, right? The roof. I said, notes. And I'm not joking, Peter. You could not read those notes. And so I complained. I said, I want these put into some type of readable format. Now, here's the thing. This year in 2024, they've been sent to me by Kennedy's Law from another solicitor that deciphered them. And one of those witnesses down there, Pat Rutherford, he saw Jack after he went past the can crushing shed. And in his statement, he said he thought it was very strange because at this point, the men are drowning, they're dying. And all he said was, have you seen my dad? Now, can you imagine the importance of those statements if they was, and bearing in mind, I won't go over the all others because we haven't got the time, but the truth in it is in all those statements that was hidden from us. And I've only just read them in 2024. And so that's what happened on the first 3 days of the trial. Now, I went upstairs in the court canteen because I could not believe what was happening here. I couldn't believe this trial was continuing. And I closed my eyes and refused to continue. And two solicitors from Kennedy's Law came upstairs to me in the court canteen and coerced me into continuing, telling me the barristers would correct what these people have done wrong with the CCTV, and they would tell the judge this. And those two solicitors, Catherine and George, I'd also met them a month before the trial. I was told to go to Kennedy's offices in Birmingham, and I met with them, and all that meeting was about, they showed me one A4 piece of paper, what the police had put together, which I didn't recognise, and it was a company organisation chart. It wasn't ours. Mine had me firmly at the top, Ian Lievers, managing director, with an arrow going down from me to my son, co-director, Stuart Brown, Mike Marooniak, yard manager, and arrows going to the staff, all from there. My wife was in a little box on the top left-hand side, all alone, with no arrows going to her or away, saying, accounts, sorry. That was it. This company organisation chart that I was put in front of me, the police had put it together, and they put an arrow directly under me to my wife and away from my wife to all other staff. And this was presented to the jury, and they told me also upstairs in the canteen that would be corrected. They actually told me in the meeting in March, when I said I don't recognise this, they said then that they would get James Shrimpton, my solicitor, to deal with it. And he did nothing. And so that's the basics of it. And so when all this happened on that night, and this is very crucial too, the police never seized the tanker. Now, this is a murder scene, I beg your pardon, in my opinion, from what I see from the CCTV. I can only assume that something drastic here gone wrong and it's another crime. They didn't seize the tanker, but here's the critical thing that they did. In my offices, my staff offices, the main office, they left a police officer that night to guard the officers all night, but not the tanker. The police, the very next day, on the 23rd of December 2016, left my premises before lunch that day and had no forensics in. They didn't isolate the tanker. They didn't close it off. They didn't take it away to be forensically looked over. They did nothing. They left by lunchtime, leaving just two health and safety executive inspectors. And it's approximately 4 o'clock that day. They called me into the main office.
Can I
to ask
just
me
go
what
back a bit there then?
Yes.
Right. So if they've put like a police officer like in the office, but there's the tanker there where obviously no matter how it's happened, there's this tragedy where there's got like 2 men that have died inside the tanker. Yes.
Yes.
So
that is
basically,
correct.
I mean, again, you know, but anyway, so they found them and removed them.
Yes. Well, what happened, Peter? Let's go back a little bit more. And it wasn't until 11 minutes and 33 seconds, and remember this, guys, that Richard Draycott is seen, and I've not shared this one, eventually leaving the mixing shed after they've been drowning 11 minutes and 33 seconds. And why do I say this? He confirmed in his own words when he backed in the mixing shed, which I've talked about earlier, that Nathan, the first man who went into the tanker, this all happened within a minute. Now, we have no CCTV cameras that ever survived in the mixing shed. Strangely, they always got broken down. There was always damage. So I have no footage in the mixing shed. But on the pole facing to the mixing shed that I've shared with everyone, they could never get up there to destroy them. And so they survived. And that's why we have the timeline. And so here's the thing. When he's seen exiting the mixing shed for the very first time, guess what he's doing? He's pulling his overalls on again. What he does when he gets out of his cab. I say that he wasn't at that tanker, and it's not what happened, what he says. I say he was sat in the safety of his cab, and whatever happened at that tanker, it was only at that point on 11 minutes 33 seconds when he's first seen. Now he comes up to the office, and on the scene, the second scene that I've shared, you will see now a proper emergency. Now, what he said when he got to the office door is this, and only this, which caused my son to go into fight. We all know about fight or flight. And he only said this: the name of the second person is in a tanker. This caused my son so much alarm to jump from behind his desk and to sprint. And it's there on the CCTV footage. It will never go away, to get to that scene as fast as he can. And as you see him going down, you see others racing down there behind him. And then you see eventually the guys come out of the can crushing shed and they also follow him down, because this is now a true emergency scene. Now, it is the shocking thing. When my son arrived at that tanker, he noticed, and this would be on minute 12, that nobody, and there was several men down there in that shed, in that building, whilst them men were drowning. The valve, the free flow valve, which my wife asked to be opened to check to see if it was concrete, was still shut. He couldn't believe that it was still shut. And so he screamed at the top of his voice, "Open the effing valve." He then stripped to his thermals, climbed up the outside ladder of the tanker, shouted for a ladder, and he went in. But, excuse the pun, the men were dead weights by this point because they'd been submerged for 12 minutes or over. And something else that I've not talked about on that first CCTV clip, which I urge everyone to look at, you've got 2 fitters, whilst them men are drowning, carrying away a ladder. We didn't know it was a ladder until my daughter eventually got the true hard drive whilst I was in jail, and my nephew plugged it in, but it had been wiped clean. But he also had the 2 hours footage that the solicitors had, and he cleaned that up himself, that they said was obscure. We thought those 2 fitters in the trial were carrying away a pipe, and so it wasn't addressed. He noticed that it was a ladder. He rang my wife's solicitor and said, "Nathan, it's a ladder, not a pipe." And Nathan said something very strange to him. He said, "Oh, those 2 guys were contacted and they saw nothing." Well, you can clearly see him leaving the scene. But this is more shocking, Peter, because they were employees of mine. One of them came to court and he wasn't shown that CCTV footage to clarify actually what he was carrying. He wasn't shown the CCTV footage at all. And more shocking, the second man carrying the ladder was never interviewed by the police and hasn't been to this day. There was another man down there, and you can see it on that first CCTV clip. You see a white cab pull in front of the mixing shed when Richard Draycott reverses in. And that company is called Pink Parrot, and that driver is called Steve Lane. Again, the police never interviewed that man. So there you've got two witnesses at the scene of what I say is a double homicide, and they were never interviewed by the police.
So again, well, let's go back. So to these guys, an unfortunate, like, you know, tragic event. So, so how did they get them out?
And so thank you. And so when my son Lance, my co-director, was unsuccessful to pull them out, I had a builder working on site at that time around the back where Dave Maruniak claimed he was unloading a lorry, and he was building some new workshops for me. And at the time, I would say, where everyone left the office to sprint down to the scene, or just before that, because there's a small back door from the mixing shed, along with the big roller shutter doors at the front. Dave Maruniak, who claims he wasn't down there, comes walking up from the back door of that mixing shed, and he bumps into Jake Welch, the builder. At that time, Jake has got a still saw in his hand, and he never asked him to go back with him to save the man. In fact, Jake had used Dave's van that day, along with my son's friend who worked for us, Will, to go and fetch a piano for my son for Christmas. And all Jake did is he gave Dave back his van keys, and then Dave continued walking up to the office to take him away from the scene as far as possible. And Jake continued then to wash the mixer out, and he arrived in the office later. So sometimes let's just go back a bit, and I know it gets long and protracted. When Richard Draycott arrived at the door and said the person's in the tank, Dave Maruniak was through the office door talking to my wife about a sofa that was left in his van now, actually, because they delivered a piano and they took a sofa away from my son's to make space for it. It was an old damaged sofa. And so he said that he was at the office door talking about, in his statement, a private matter. And so there we have a man who's been identified fleeing the scene and is now at the office door. And so coming to the two holes, when everybody's been to the scene, down to the scene, and Jake's washed the mixer out, he takes the still saw back to the office for safekeeping. And at that point, my wife's screaming on the floor, on just understanding that two men are in, or one man, should I say, at that point, when Richard Draycott got to the door, was in a tanker. She knew the urgency of this because my father had told both myself and Dave Maruniak, who worked for my dad as a youngster, never to enter tankers, which my wife knew also. And she knew this was danger. And so she's screaming hysterically. Now, Jake says, I've got a still story here. I could go down and cut them out. And he runs to the scene. Now, when he gets to the scene, the two fitters now have arrived back with cutting bottles at the scene. And I've listened to the emergency call where down there at the scene, Stuart Brown's talking to the ambulance services. And I could hear, and I didn't hear this until I was in the court, behind the glass, gagged. I could hear Dave Maruniak saying, you can't do that, there's fumes. He was stopping the fitters, launching a rescue attempt to cut the tanker open. Jake arrived, and Dave Maruniak tried to take the still saw off him, actually, to stop him. He said it would explode. But Jake ignored him, and he cut two big holes, one in the middle compartment to take away the second man who apparently went into the tanker, and one hole further down, which I've shared on TikTok, to take the first man who apparently went in the tanker. But here's the shocking evidence, and I might be leaking stuff out here, but I've already said it because I've been to the tanker myself after the police refused me January this year. And it's also on my TikTok post. I discovered when I got to the tanker that the first person hadn't died directly under that middle lid. It was in the rear compartment of that tanker, and it crawled through a small 18-inch hole, and he was retrieved from that rear compartment. So that, and all this was hidden from the court. None of this, because the police or HSC never investigated the tanker, could be given to the jury. And so when I discovered that January of this year, 2024, it nearly put me to my knees when I saw the clear partition between the middle compartment and the rear compartment. The tanker, Peter, when I purchased it, used to be a 3-potted tanker, so it had 3 legs and 3 compartments. I spent over £25,000 refurbishing that tanker, and I took away the lids from the top of the tanker, from the front and rear compartments, and sealed them over. Now, I thought at that point when we did this that the compartments had been cut in and it was just one big open vessel. What I didn't realise was the tanker, before I purchased it, had already been made into a single potter, but the lid's left on, and it had a large, well, I say a large, an 18-inch hole at the middle, a small hole at the top to let the air go between them so you don't get a suction and suck the tank in, and a little U shape at the bottom for the liquid to go through. And what do we know? Why did it put me to my knees? Those down there at the scene that caused this, which in my opinion is the serious crime you could ever get, never mentioned that the first man apparently was taken from that rear compartment. And so when I saw that it crawled through this 18-inch hole, and I was at the airfield, it was a mile off en route when I go to see my wife at Drake Hall Jail. It's an open airfield now at Utoxeter. I text my solicitor, who was my solicitor at the time, and said, I've got you bastard, because it shocked me. Now that, although I'm talking about it, and it's fresh evidence, I'm sorry, but I've already leaked it. And it's a shame in this country if we can't tell the truth and have to hide things when you've got an innocent woman in jail. And so I hope everyone's thought this so far.
Go back to like so did anyone ever literally see people hit these guys climb into the tanker?
No, they don't, because, well, down there, if you remember Dracott's version, which we don't believe, in there at that time, Jack Maruniak was there. The person who claimed that, that refused to look at the large TV screen in court to identify himself, and the judge allowed it. Now, he said this in chief during the trial. He said, and he was at the far end of the mixing shed where the blenders are, watching the porridge go up to a vibrating sieve that I had, also with 10mm holes, to ensure if you get any packaging, because plastics can get through the mincer of 10mm holes, but when they go up into the holding tank for the final product to go into, I have a vibrating sieve table with small 10mm holes also. And so sometimes you get larger pieces of plastic that sit on there and you scrape them off. He was up there, and you can imagine it was very loud. And in fact, the barrister said to him this, because he said, whilst this apparently was happening, that he heard the second man screaming for his name. And it was put to him, are you sure, Mr. Maruniak, above all this loud news, you heard him shouting your name? Now remember, this had to be within seconds of Dracott Maruniak coming back with Kater, because remember, when you look at the CCTV, the seconds apart, but he's at the far end of the mixer. Now he claims this. He claims that he jumped down, run to the tanker, climbed up the outside ladder, and saw the second man stood there, and he said he looked green. Now, we've got a clash of a timeline here, actually, because I hope you're following it. Because when Dracott claims he went back with Curtis, they would have met on the ladder. And how did the second man get in there in these seconds? And all the timeline doesn't match. But what he said was that he heard him screaming his name. And so if we are to believe this, then when those two fitters are carrying the ladder away, remember, they would have heard the screaming and shouting, which is what I've been saying on social media this past month. And people say, because it's silence, well, how do you know they were screaming and shouting for their lives, as I say? And I confirm it with what was said in court, in those court transcripts, taken from what Jack Maruniak said.
So, all right. So nobody's seen them get in, right? But so the guy that come with the still saw, which is like a big circular saw, and you hold it like that, and you can drill right? I drill cut like lines. I've used them plenty. So this guy's cut, I presume, at least one big hole in the side of the tanker. Now, are they draining it as well? Because you said that your son had shouted for them to drain the stuff out as well. So the stuff's flowing out there. I presume when they've cut a hole, stuff will be coming out there, right? So eventually they've cleared it. They've found what would be by then, like dead bodies, I presume. But so they've got them out. Yes, they've got them out then. Is that right?
Well, thank you for saying that, Peter, about you'd expect liquid to be coming out there, because the police never took to seize the tanker, and I didn't want my staff looking at what happened. It was taken around to a former friend of mine's field and parked in there over the Christmas holidays. And you'd expect this thick porridge, if you cut those holes, to have left stain marks where it had been cut. You'd also expect, Peter, as you just said, if you've used these, if you had liquid in there, it would have been splattering Jake as he cut the holes.
Yeah.
None of this happened, because by the time the Jake got there, moments later after my son, the liquid came out of the tanker so fast, it had gone down and it had exited the tanker. But here's something else very shocking, which I want you to understand. When that hole was cut in the middle compartment, because my son went in, remember, and he tried, and he said, in his words, he said he was up there 10, 20 minutes inside trying to pull them up. But anyway, he never mentioned the first person because he didn't know he was in the tanker. And so when that middle hole had been cut and they took away the second guy and he was being put onto the stretcher, Mike Maruniak, the yard manager who had left at approximately 4 o'clock, just before he left, on CCTV footage, he passed in Nigel Curtis something and he goes over to Conifers and he's doing this business. And he doesn't smoke. I've got that CCTV. But anyway, he's arrived back. So presumably Jack's called him by now and he put his hand in that middle hole. Now, why would you do that when it's bad enough someone's just died in a tanker? And what he said was this, and it's in the statements. He put it in and put his hand under that little hole that I mentioned at the bottom. And he felt Nathan's leg. And he said, there's another one in here. That nearly put my son onto his knees because he couldn't believe. Could you imagine the shock and horror realizing someone else was in a tank? But why an emergency scene when you're in fight or flight? Adrenaline's running. I've been there myself because I came across an incident with 2 boys that had just died the year before, and I'll never explain what I saw when I climbed to that car and saw them. But anyway, why would he put his hand in that tanker when it's bad enough? He knew he was in there because his son had rang him. And so then this is why Jake cut another big hole in the rear compartment to extract who apparently was the first.
So you've got like a tanker, imagine it like a big submarine, let's just call it that, just for people watching, okay? So you've got a big tube, but this tube is actually separated in the middle with a big, let's just call it a big steel wall. You got a little gap under the bottom and a little gap at the top to let the air and the liquids flow. And in the middle is a small 18-inch hole, which is not very big.
No,
right?
correct.
I mean, 18 inches is about that. It's not a big area to try and get through. So what the saying is, right, that 2 men have gone into a tanker, into a big pile of porridge, right, like the stuff that was inside it. So somehow one of them, this is apparently the story, has gone into this porridge and been able to swim without being able to probably, I mean, like, how can you swim in porridge? I've never been able to see that. Then they've gone through this 18-inch hole, which I couldn't get my shoulders through. I just simply couldn't. I know that physically. There's no way in the world I could do it. But he's got through there into the second separate section of this tanker. That's basically what they're saying, yes?
Well, this is true, Peter, but with 6 tons on that tanker, it would certainly have been above his Wellingtons. So I'm only, again, this is me saying it's not speculation. Let's just say it's fact. If it's 6 ton, it would have been over his Wellingtons and probably not quite up to his waist. But you can get through that hole because I went to it myself and I'm a bodybuilder, and you can get through it. It's very difficult. So why Was he in that rear compartment? This is the question, because you can't do nothing from inside the tanker. This has been confirmed by the Health and Safety Executive themselves and a doctor in engineering that came to court. There's nothing you can do, which then brings me to the speculation, because Dave Maruniak, who it is seen coming from the mixing shed, and the trial started in April 2022. On the 22nd of February 2022, I do a lot of running, and I run from here and I do a regular run. And I was on the small back lane from here, and I always run towards the oncoming traffic, and a white van came towards me, who I recognised as Dave Maruniak. And I remember 4 digits of that number plate. It was either FH or FM68. And he swerved to hit me. But I just got over this little unbacked bridge, and I nearly went down the ditch. And I spun round and I clocked 4 digits of the registration plate. And so I went to the police station the next day in Grantham and reported it. I heard nothing. 2 weeks later, I rang Birdstum headquarters in Nottinghamshire. I was assured an officer would contact me. Nothing. 2 weeks later, I did the same again. Assured again, an officer would contact me. The trial's about to start, and one of the Kennedy's lawyers gave me the information how to make an online complaint, which I did so. I went to jail, and I'm fearful of my life coming out, because now at that point, remember, in February, we didn't know it was him coming from the mixing shed, remember. That was only discovered on the 10th of April, just before the trial, when my wife was at their solicitors in Manchester, again, scouring over it, hours after hours, looking at it. When she made the discovery, hang on, that's Dave Maruniak, not Richard Draycott. It took my wife, not solicitors, who have been paid £2 million out of this by insurers, to discover this. And so at that point, when he tried to kill me, I didn't know it was him. But just before I came out of jail, my daughter rang police headquarters for an update, because I'm fearful for my life. And she recorded that, because she records everything from Samsung. This lady officer claims she didn't know nothing about it. Without my daughter giving her any information at all, she then knew absolutely everything. And it's all on the recording. I've shared it on TikTok. I then couldn't wait to get my daughter off the phone. I think the police were trying to cover this up. And I lose what the question was, but that's something else that... Oh, yeah, by the way.
Okay, so
let me just say, Peter, while I think of it. And so last year, 2023, victims of crime came to see me. And it was a gentleman who was a serving police officer himself, who left the force, commendable, having served 35 years, back in the days when you do proper policing and you have proper training. And he sat and he listened to my story. And he said this, and this is his theory. He says, Ian, there was carrying drugs in your tanker. You would be surprised the places that they can steal drugs. And it hit me like it hit a brick wall. And it makes sense. And what he said, they'd be carrying a package under the lid. Now, my product is quite dense because it's 40% dry matter. So in a 30,000 litre vessel, it would always sit further down from the lid. So if you put something under that lid, and we're travelling to farms up and down the country, such as up to Listers, up near you, and all the others up there, Cornford, the rest of them, you're going down dark lanes, and it just makes perfect sense to ship drugs around the country in a road tanker that the police would never, ever decide to look inside full of pig feed. Now, that is speculation, I accept. I do accept this, but this was a serving ex-police officer that gave me his theory as to why they'd be in the rear of that tanker. He claims that probably the package, whatever it was sucked down and stuck in the pump. But you can't get to the pump anyway, because when I went to Airfield, I've gone with the guy that built the tanker systems for me. It goes down a 6-inch pipe to a 90-degree bend, and it goes 5 feet before it reaches the pump. So you can't do nothing from inside the tanker anyway. So that baffles me, and I do not know, but that was his theory as to why it was in the rear compartment.
All right, so let's go back to the night again, because I still need it clarifying. So, like, you know, unfortunately, the tragedy of these guys there. So they've cut, or whoever it was, your son has cut like spaces to get these guys out. So obviously, there's ambulances and police have been phoned at that time. Is that correct?
It is correct, yes.
Right, so there'll be ambulances travelling there. There must be police travelling there. So then they'll have taken them out of the actual tankers. Obviously, the paramedics or whatever it is are going to do their thing. They're going to say, right, we have to go and put these in the ambulance to remove them, right, to see whatever else that they can do. Now, if they're obviously, it probably is correct that they're going to be like gone by them, but they still have to do the job. So, I mean, I've been in situations similar, so they'll have had to remove them. Is that what happened?
That is correct, yes. Between
hang on. So then, like, the police have got there, must have as well. So then, I mean, again, right? Like, I've been in situations like this, so they'll have like sealed off that. From my experience, that would have been sealed off as a potential crime, a crime scene, and they would have seen it. They would have had the tape off. They wouldn't have let anyone else go anywhere near it, and then they would have like had everyone else there ready to be interviewed. Right? That is generally in situations that I've had experience with. That is what happens. And then nobody will be able to go near that actual scene. But you're saying that they didn't even bother doing that at all. They didn't even investigate or have a look at or do forensics at that actual tanker where this tragedies happened. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that is correct. It's not what I'm saying. It's 100% correct. Richard Draycott was walked back down with the police officer that night to take his digicard out and his keys to go home. And he passed the tanker. At this point, Peter, also what he did notice, and he said, the fire brigade then, because the members of the front compartment, and they know that this is where it all comes to fruition of truth. The reason for cutting the middle hole and the reason cutting for the rear hole, because one man's from the middle, one's from the rear. Guess what the fire brigade did? Which confirmed they was thinking someone's in the rear, someone's in the middle. It confirms it. Richard said this. He noticed that the fire brigade, they cut an even bigger hole in the front compartment, just to ensure there was nobody in there also.
Okay. So again, I'm only talking from situations I've experienced, so real life situations for myself. So I've been in these things, right? Situations, and I have had things taken away from me. Okay, that in a case, you know, like dealing with like the police. And, you know, I have never seen these items again for well over a year until after a trial. Okay. So I know what they're like with evidence, and they won't let anyone touch anything. So the tanker itself, right? If I just go back, because I'm just trying to like put like logical things on and to see the gaps in what the police have been doing. So that tanker then should have been taken away and put in police custody and held forever until they could actually at least do more forensics on it or try and figure out what happened. But that didn't happen either, did it?
No, it didn't, not at all. I had it first of all moved up into the paddock next to my main offices, which is the smoking area. And then as I say, my friend took it round to his field a few miles away, and there it stood. And I've got photographs he's taken with a timeline of 7th of January. So it was there 7th of January, and I think it didn't go until February time. Of course, then the police wanted to get the tanker away. They didn't want me to realise or to go to that tanker to notice that there was a physical compartment. And so they had to hide the tanker. So then they decided that they did the job properly months later and take it to Hixon Airfield, where head of legal services for the entire East Midlands Police Force, Laura Hunt, is now claiming that that is a police exhibit. And why do I say this? Right up until my wife's appeal failed on the 28th of November last year, 2023, I had a line of communications going with Detective Superintendent Chris Baker. And so after it had failed, on the first week of January, I emailed Chris and said, Chris, could I have my tanker back now, please? And this was a Friday. And he said, yes, to Mr. Lievers, not a problem. If you've not heard from me by next Friday, give me a call and we'll sort it. By Wednesday of that week, I got an email off him saying, well, no, this is a police exhibit. Laura Hunt, head of the entire legal services for the East Midlands, has now decided that that tanker is a police exhibit. An exhibit that they never used for any purpose of their trial whatsoever. They couldn't have, could they? For nothing.
This was after the trial, yeah? You're talking about after the trial. So they've done the trial.
Yes.
So now it's a police exhibit, but they didn't care about it before then when they were trying to like prove something at a trial.
Yes, that is correct. They never used the tanker, nor did the CCTV.
It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. This is why I say our case is the biggest miscarriage of justice this country has ever seen. Bigger than the Guildford 4 or Birmingham 6. I hope your viewers and yourself will understand this now, Peter. It's everything I say is truthful, it's factual. Whenever have you known the police not use CCTV footage? Now, I've seen on TikTok 2 other cases similar to mine where individuals get dropped, will get shredded, and it's actually filmed as they're being shredded. And this has been filmed by West Midlands Police, who put their own watermark onto this CCTV footage and identify, label everyone correctly to be used in a Crown Court trial. When you look at those clips that I've shared, it's me that's labelled those. The police prosecution never used any part of that CCTV evidence for any identification purposes whatsoever during that trial. And in fact, when I went to jail, I wanted my hard drive back because of this 2-hour poor copy that my solicitor claimed was made more obscure by this expert. I wanted the hard drive. And so I was demanding for it from jail. And eventually, after the CPS reluctantly didn't want it to go, or the police, it was handed over to my daughter in a polythene carrier bag, November 2022, just before I came out of jail. And it was then when my nephew plugged it in, who was the managing director of Middlebrook Transport, the owner, and the hard drive had actually been wiped clean. And so at this point, I wasn't realising my wife's solicitors were against us. Mine was, obviously, because when I went to jail, he lodged no appeal whatsoever within the 28 days. In fact, he never spoken to me again after I went to jail. Well, they wanted us to continue to ensure the appeal failed us, so they was very amicable with us. And I said, right, well, I want to send it somewhere to have it retrieved. And this is when Nathan Buckley said, well, there's Sci4 Forensics in Stockport, Manchester. There are 2 forensics companies that are highly regarded, Sci4, and I forget the other name, in Birmingham. And so I sent it to Sci4 Forensics to have the footage retrieved. And I forget how it happened because I have suffered PTSD. But in 2023, last year, is when I discovered, I think it was something Sci4 said, that it hadn't gone there. And they hadn't made it more obscure. That's when I realised, because then I sent emails out to the head of Kennedy's Law, Danny McShee, asking him, where did you send it? And it was then when it came back, Cavalier Studios, and it shocked me. So they've not sent it to any forensics company to have the footage cleaned up at all, or even gate analysis. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the more that you hear, definitely there's something not wrong. I mean, like from our, well, when I say our, I mean, like on the channel, you know, we look at things and we investigate sort of like the background of the bar society, the barristers, the solicitors. And what we do know is that they are all sworn to the court. They have no allegiance to a client. They have no worry about a client. All they do is they support the court and what the court says, and the court being the bar, and that's going into the City of London, which is the reason behind everything, by the way. It's all financial. It doesn't matter. All crime, be a crime, even murder, it's purely got a financial gain to it. I don't want to go down and confuse you too much, because obviously you've got a lot on your mind with everything going on. But, you know, there's a reason why things happen.
Yes.
In these cases, and you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. It's got nothing to do with you, you know, and they have no interest whatsoever in the individual. You know, what they've done is they're making a bigger tragedy of already what is a horrible tragedy of these men.
Yes.
But so in reality, let's go back again as well, because your wife, unfortunately, she's still in prison.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But let's go back there. So in reality, she's turned up to a company, right? That's just like, I've come to see you, right? And
yes.
so I've got a Christmas jumper on, right?
Yeah.
I've got nothing to do with your company, right? You know, I'm just popping in there for like a party or like a little laugh, you know, before Christmas. And so because I'm there, the police have just went and said, I'll tell you what, we're going to actually create a separate company structure. We'll make it up. And what we'll do is we'll put like Ian there and then his wife straight underneath it to say she's in charge of it all. So it's all her fault, no matter what. I know you have to take responsibility. I get that part. So what they've just went and put her in there when she's got nothing to do with the company whatsoever. Is that correct?
This is 100% correct. And something else, Peter, because my solicitor, and I was tenacious about this, I've done over this last year over 400 TikTok posts. Now, in the 5 years leading up to the trial, if I said I wrote to him once a night, that's an under exaggeration. I wrote to him thousands and thousands of emails with evidence. He never used anything. He never came to me with body cam footage or anything. Now, only a few weeks back, there was some body cam footage used in the trial, by the way. But only a few weeks back, my daughter sent me the sergeant who arrived at the scene, Sergeant Whittle. Now, I've looked at that and immediately I could see the big red herring. The officers who came up to him, and I think some of these were special constables actually, they said this to him on arrival. This is a close confined space incident. And there you go. The police went down the rabbit hole and they came for us. They let these people that's caused this tragedy off the hook and come for my family. And it speaks volumes. Upstairs, when my wife's in shock, they made no caution at all, but went straight into interviews. They asked my son what his role is, and he said he's the general manager, he's the owner, and his mum does accounts. I arrive because I've been to Bolton on business, and then what I always do, and I've always said this to my friends throughout my life, when I got back that day, I got a bit of spare time, I went to the gym. And I went to the gym actually around about 4:20. As I pulled up at the gym, my daughter was ringing me. I didn't answer it. I wanted to get the gym out of the way. When I came out, she gave me the shocking news and I broke down in tears. And as I was going up Beacon Hill out of Newark to go down to the site, I thought in my mind that those men must have fallen into a mixing tank and they've been chopped up. And so you see on police body cam, when I come upstairs and open the boardroom door, and I embrace my wife and she's crying, I say this, how could this happen again? Now, in 2005, Peter, there was another tragedy. I had two people working for me in the business at that time in that yard, Dave and Mike Maruniak. I had a little transport office, a porter cabin. I had a full-time transport manager, Colin Radford, and his wife, and I ran 4 trucks. 3 of those trucks was based up in Chester. 1 truck was ran out of my yard. And I had a night driver for that called Perry Cartwright. So at any given time, there's just 2 men working in the yard. And this person who died had worked for me for about a week. Now, you'll understand a tractor and a power takeoff PTO, which drives machinery, application, and whatever it is. And he was driving a pump attached to this JCB fast track. And according to Dave Maruniak, who was stood next to him, he sat on this PTO shaft, and I don't need to say the rest. And I always thought this was strange. So here we have a man stood next to someone who died in 2005. Here we have a man down there at the scene in 2016 who's denied it. And here we have a man in 2022 who tried to run me over. Now, in sentencing, I'm going to skip forward a bit and please come back to any points you want to ask me. The judge said that this man who died in 2005 was cleaning a tanker out. Now, sitting on a PTO shaft, it got nothing to do with cleaning a tanker out. And actually, the company barrister did correct him. He also said this, Peter, and you'll have picked up enough of what the story I've told you. He also said that my wife told the first man, who apparently dropped in out of Draycott's arms, was told to go in that tanker by my wife. Again, it was pulled up by the company barrister. It was not part of that trial in the 4 weeks that the trial ran. In fact, the trial was set out for 8 weeks, but it was rushed through in 4. The defence refused me giving evidence. The defence refused my son giving evidence. There's details I can give you about this, but these are facts. This is why it is the biggest miscarriage of justice this country has ever seen, in my opinion.
Yeah. Wow.
Unbelievable.
That's yeah, it is. So now, right? So you obviously you're what, the managing director, yeah. So then you've actually sort of like if it what was it they called it, manslaughter, something manslaughter.
No,
Yeah,
mine was
gross
mine was no.
misconduct manslaughter.
My wife was gross misconduct manslaughter. Me and my wife wasn't the director, as I say, company secretary. She was the company secretary in 2005. But let me just bring you on to something else. The judge also allowed in bad character against my wife. So we have two men working in the yard, Dave and Mike Bruniak. We have this gentleman come to work for 2 or 3 weeks. I have a transport manager, his wife, there's myself, and 4 trucks running. The judge allowed the prosecution to bring in bad character against my wife. And you know, Peter, and it was a very experienced criminal barrister for the prosecution. He attacked my wife for 3 solid days. She broke down at one point, and the judge did allow her to go outside to get some fresh air. And he was attacking her, claiming that she ran the business in 2005 when this individual lost his life. You've got these few people working in the business. My wife, as I've said, and it's in my book, it's everywhere. My wife had an hair salon in Mansfield, a very successful hair salon, which she ran. And she didn't let that go to her niece. She leased it to her niece in 2015. But the judge allowed the prosecution very skillfully to attack my wife. Guess what? The defence barristers, of which there was 3 of them, nobody defended this point at all. Now, what the judge did very craftily, later in the trial, whilst the jury were out, he gave my wife a good character back. He said this, he's giving Mrs. Lievers her limbs back. But here's the startling evidence here, the facts. The defence barristers didn't tell the jury this. They didn't explain this. So the jury, as they say, the horse had already bolted. They thought my wife was running the business. 2005. No wonder they found her guilty. My wife's co-defendant, Stuart Brown, the transport manager, not guilty on the same charge. Richard Drake got never charged, a professional person in charge of his lorry. Mike Maruniak, yard manager, never charged or investigated. Or my son, couldn't investigate my son, co-director, because then he would have told the jury of his gallant efforts that night, trying to save the man, risking his own life. Because, as I said, Peter, we don't allow people to enter tankers. It wasn't part of my procedures and practices. And my dad told me from a small child never to enter tankers. I thought it was methane gas. Oh, by the way, the prosecution in the press reported I was selling toxic product. And there was toxic fumes. This was never confirmed by no analysis. I gave James Crimpton the very next day a sample, which I forgot about. PTSD took it away, only this year because the detectives want it. I've been asking for it from Kennedy's. They won't produce it. And so, yeah, these are the things that were said in the press, all of it, and entirely false. And here's something which I need to make very clear. And I've wrote to the head of the Health and Safety Executive, Sarah Albon, last week, or no, 2 or 3 weeks back. A follow-up on one last week and another one yesterday. Now, she's, again, very much like the post office scandal. She's at the top in the same position. She's handed it back down to people underneath her. And there's a Chris fella from the Health and Safety Executive. I wrote to him yesterday to say, I want the report, because they stated on the 12th of September it was a joint investigation and they were supporting the police. So therefore, you would expect a report, wouldn't you, about which the judge said a total lack of disregard for health and safety. Why do I want this report? It's non-existent. Why do I say this? Remember, on the 23rd of December 2016, the Health and Safety Executive, those 2 inspectors at approximately 4 o'clock, made me believe, or coerced me to believe, that the men had fallen into the tanker. Why do I say this? They asked me to get harnesses to ensure drivers, when they climb the outside of the tanker, to watch the load either fill, empty, or wash out from the lid, wear an harness. And they had me sign 1 piece of paper to accept that I would do this before my business commenced. And then they left the site. They investigated the tanker no more. So less than 24 hours after a double homicide, both the police and the Health and Safety Executive have left the site and never looked at one of my tankers again. The health and safety executive officers, inspectors, went off on their Christmas holidays and didn't return until the 17th of January 2017 and never looked at another tanker again, and never, I continued for 4 more years in business, never asked me to do a risk assessment for entering a close confined space or to enter a tanker at all. Now you imagine if someone else had fallen into the tanker or went to the tanker, would they have been liable? Because they knew this practice did not happen. It wasn't part of my procedures and practices. In 2017, yes, of course, 3 of them came back, and in the new can crushing plant, but you can see where the cans are coming out on the CCTV footage that I've shared, the lighting was a bit poor, and so they wanted me to put better lighting in there. In the mixing shed itself around the mixing plant, before the deaths, a fabricator was already building for me a new gantry around the entire mixing plant, and he'd not put a kicker plate on. So again, an improvement notice. Yes, there was several improvement notices, but here's the thing that I'm just saying fresh today. Just fresh today, I say this one, and just my thought today. Although I had improvement notices, they never insisted that I make any other risk assessments for any part of my business. But even if it was risk assessments for any other part of my business, remember one thing: the only scene here, the crime scene, is the tanker, not any other part of my business. It was the tanker, and the tanker alone that 2 men died in. Never investigated. So, which you'll understand, Peter, yesterday, and it's a little bit like child's play this is, because I said to them, I will shame them, as in the Horizon scandal, if they do not give me this report, and they know the truth here. They know my wife's innocent, you know. He said, because I threatened this, I'll go through freedom of information. He said, here's the link for freedom of information. Where is the empathy in this country? Where is the common sense? Where is the when people realise they've done something wrong? Do they not go to their boss and knock on the door? Hey, Governor, we've got a problem here. Look, Mrs. Lievers, she's innocent. And they don't do it, Peter, do they? And I want to bring you on to Chris Baker. Chris Baker, last year through our communications, when I came out of jail, I couldn't believe my wife's appeal was going in without the CCTV evidence and without perjury, which is what we said, that we've got 6 people factually lied under oath. And so I insisted, I screamed from the rooftops for them to get a CCTV report put together. It took them months to do it. It's very detailed. I think I shared it with you, actually. So they did that, and the perjury report. And we said we didn't want my wife's barrister to represent her in the appeal court because he'd not got the CCTV evidence in or perjury. And they kept telling us they couldn't add it. And after a lot of battling, after my wife's solicitor, the lady one, Molly Manga, went to see my wife in jail and broke down in tears, begged my wife to continue using Jim. And she said this, just use it for this appeal, Gillian. Well, what did that mean, Peter? Because there was just this appeal. Anyway, in that appeal, it failed. Although the CCTV evidence was in, I believe, 0.78, he refused to tell the appeal court judges about the CCTV facts. And so that's why they upheld my wife's conviction. I stood up and said the men were murdered and left the court in disgust. And also, those appeal judges, which Jim Agros did not correct, by the way, we've already talked about this one, they said this. In 2005, the gentleman that lost his life was cleaning a tanker out. So whilst they went to retire, I went out into the corridors and tracked Jim Agros down with my sister-in-law, and we screamed at him, you've got to go back and tell them the truth. These things are facts. Chris Baker, the detective superintendent last year, and we'll all understand that these people are or should be of high intelligence, having a role that he sits in, being a detective superintendent. I gave him the CCTV report. I then gave him the perjury report. Now, these are facts that are proven to be another crime. Perjury is something very serious. Guess what he did? Because he realised it was serious, he went to see the CPS who was involved in our case, and the prosecution barrister John Harrison. And we all know from our trial that they didn't want this overturning. And so he went back to work with his tail between his legs and just said, I can't investigate any further. Again, where's common sense in this country? Where's not knocking on Rob Nixon's door, the chief of police for Leicester, saying, Gov, we've got a problem here, like we'd see back in the Sweeney, something like that. Where's it gone? Where's it all gone wrong? What's happened to the Nolan principles? Because when that came out in 2005, people in public office should be made accountable for their actions. Rob Nixon this year, Pete, I'm jumping on a little bit. When I employed those two detectives, skilled, experienced detectives with 65 years police experience work behind them, working for Greater Manchester and Merseyside Police for both fraud and anti-corruption, have conducted a very thorough investigation this year, and they have an 100-page report which is now with my wife's solicitor. My wife's got a copy and their solicitor. I've not got a copy because I could leak it. I could speak to you about it, and that's how God they are. Anyway, I wrote to the Chief of Police for Leicestershire, Bob Nixon, several times, as have many public going back a year asking him to reinvestigate this case. And I asked him in August of this year, very politely, Mr. Nixon, could I give you this report for you to review, to look over, to decide yourself if this was another crime? And it is factual, Pete, and it has proven facts, which I can only go that far. He replied to me and talk about the Nolan principles. He replied to me and talk about child's play. He doesn't mention the report at all. He says, Detective Superintendent Chris Baker looked at this last year and we're doing no more. What does that say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. But again, you know, you're fighting sort of like you're asking the corporation to actually investigate the corporation. You know, you're asking them to actually look at themselves, and that's what they never ever want to do. But what we'll do is, how can people get to watch the videos you're talking about? You're talking about the CCTV and everything like that. So what's your actual TikTok, did you say? What's the name of your channel so people can go and have a look at it?
It would be Ian Lievers. If they search my name, Ian Lievers, or at Ian.Lievers, I think they'll find my page. There is my wife's petition. We have got now over 1,500 signatures on that petition. I want to raise enough to have this aired in Parliament itself. All of what I've told you, what I've wrote to the police and head of the Health and Safety Executive, I've copied in my local MP, Robert Jenrick. I wrote to him last January 2023, so well over a year and a half ago now, with a very humbling letter asking for him to see me, for me to go over, which I've shared with you, the CCTV report. Well, it wasn't at that time. It was the facts, which I wrote down in an email, for him to see me, to listen to my story. And then later in 2023, I furnished him with the CCTV report and page report. And he's come back to me and said that I asked him for legal advice. I never mentioned legal advice ever in any of my emails. He told me to stop pestering his... Go on.
MPs are not worth the weight in dog poo, unfortunately. So, you know, we've got no chance if you try to get them. So, what you got to do then, if you give me the link to the petition, what I'll do is I'll put it in the description. All right. Yep. So rather than go and see it, because people will be trying to write it down, we'll never get there. So send that to me. I'll put it in the description, right? So they can go and look on TikTok to see them videos, as well as, like, you know, the CCTV at Ian Lievers. That's just what it is. And that is Ian, I-A-N, and it's L-E-I-V-E-R-S.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's how to get it on TikTok to get further information, and we'll put the link in as well to the actual petition for you to sign to get that bigger room. See if we can push it out that way as well. All right. So we'll have to leave it there for now.
can I just say also that
Yeah.
I do a lot of posts, and my book is out also if people want to read it. And a few people, if they look back on my posts, when I launched this last December outside my wife's jail, it clearly says when you go on Amazon, because if you go on Amazon and look for "My wife was framed by Ian Lievers," and it explains the story in there. Although this was December before a lot of what I've just told you, I've discovered later, it gives everything there. But here's the thing, Peter: a few people attacked me over this book and said, "Oh, you're trying to profit." I would never do this. And it clearly says it in there, and it clearly says it on Amazon when you go to click. These all proceeds go to 2 charities close to my wife's heart. My wife's been a raiser of funds for charities her entire life. And so they go to Alzheimer's. It's split between 2 charities. Alzheimer's Society, 50%, and Rheumatoid. Alzheimer's Society, which is my mother-in-law contracted, and Rheumatoid, which my daughter's had from the age 7. And also, if people look at my case, a few people listen, see the horrific things that the press put. I met with the Newark Advertiser editor last September, approximately a year ago, and he put me, after I gave him the evidence, the information, the risk assessments, and everything decided, because I did take health and safety very, very seriously, he put me on the front page and page 7 of the Newark Advertiser, my local newspaper, as an apology to me for putting the false information in the press at the time of sentencing. But it wasn't their fault. It was the lies, as we know, that came from court.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the way that it works. But that's good as well that they've actually done that. Okay, so listen up there. So obviously that's a big story for Ian. But if you go to, I'll put the link for the petition, and obviously you heard it there. My wife was framed. You can actually have a look at that for that on Amazon. Yeah.
Yes.
And you know, like again, you know, this is a bad story from the beginning, and thoughts go to the families of the guys as well. Which,
of course,
it's a tragedy from start to end. You know, but there's the story. It's up to you now to listen to it. And hopefully that if nothing else, you're getting it, and then you go and have a look at the petition as well. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll see you all later.